sin and set the captive free.
He bore it all that I might live.
In His presence live. He bore it
Jesus
all
bore
that
it
I
all.
might see His
See His shining face. He bore it all that I might
I with Him might
live.
live. I stood
condemned to die.
But Jesus
Freely took my place. He bore it all that I might
in His presence
live.
live. They placed a crown of thorns upon my Savior's head. He bore it
Freely bore it all.
that I might
I
live.
with Him might live.
By cruel man with spear, His side was pierced and bled.
He bore it all that I might
In His presence
live.
live. He bore it
Jesus
all
bore
that
it
I
all.
might see His
See His shining face. He bore it all that I might
I with Him might
live.
live. I
Stood condemned to die.
But Jesus
Freely took my place. He bore it all that I might
in His presence
live.
live. Up Calvary's hill in shame the blessed Savior trod. He bore it
Freely bore it all.
that I might
I
live.
with Him might live.
Between two thieves they crucified the Son of God.
He bore it all that I might
In His presence live.
live.
He bore it
Jesus
all
bore
that
it
I
all.
might see His
See His shining face. He bore it.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about loneliness. Is kind of the theme here for tonight of Satan's arrows that he'll use against us. And so we want to kind of consider that. I was trying to think of something to kind of break the ice on this topic. Some weeks I've tried to be funny and try to have something clever, but nothing was really registering or hitting with me or thinking of something to kind of break the ice or in this topic. And so I thought, let me read a couple of the prevalent nature of loneliness. The Health Insurance Insignia's 2019, this again, before the pandemic, loneliness index. 47% of Americans reported feeling lonely sometimes or always. A little less than 43% reported feeling isolated from others. 27% of Americans rarely or never feel like they are people who understand, that they're people who understand them. Only 29% feel that they belong to a group of friends, and 25% report they can find companionship when they want it. Additionally, 1 in 5 Americans rarely, if ever, feel close to others. And only about half, 53%, reported having meaningful, in-person social interactions with friends or family on a daily basis. Gen Z, this would be 18 to 22, scored loneliness 48% out of 80, making them the loneliest generation. Millennials, ages 37, come in second with 45%. Incidentally, the greatest generation, 72 and older, scored the lowest, 38%. They have, by far, the most meaningful relationships that was identified. Again, that's 2019, so 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 years ago. You think those numbers have gotten better in the last 2, 3, 4 years? No. So when you think about lonely, what comes to mind? What, a definition, an idea, what illustration, what definition? What do you think about this idea of? Okay, the pandemic was a great illustration of that, right? Yeah. Now, there's a difference between being alone and lonely, isn't there? Right? You can be lonely in a crowd. And you can be alone and not feel lonely, right? And there's of course, there's times where we need to be with people, and that's obviously what we're arguing. But and then there's times where we need to be alone. And just because we're alone doesn't mean we're lonely. And again, just because we're with people doesn't mean that we don't feel lonely. Other thoughts come to mind, anything to think about loneliness or ways or examples? Yeah. Barlena? Be without your spouse. Yeah. We're going to come back to kind of that issue a little bit. Yeah, Maggie?
I think loneliness, especially like when you're in a crowd, is more of a feeling of left out.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. A feeling of left out. Yeah. Other thoughts? Anything that triggers that or makes you think? Yeah, Lucy?
You can, like you say, be in a crowd of people and feel like you're all alone. I mean, sometimes it can happen in families where everybody's married and happy and you're by yourself. You just feel like you're third wheel or something like that.
Right.
It can be pretty hard.
Yeah. Other thoughts, examples, things that. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. So it's personal, feeling of personal isolation in a crowded, busy world. It's not the same as being alone. We've talked about that. It's feeling isolated. That was the word Lucy used. Whether they are near or whether they are far. Maggie talked about not feeling a part of or left out. That can involve beliefs. That can involve morals or ethics. Have you ever been in a job situation and some of the people that work there, maybe a majority of people don't share your morals, your ethics, your spiritual beliefs? Isn't that a feeling? Don't you have those lonely feelings when you find yourself? I know some have traveled, and when you travel in work, if you're not aware of what often will happen is those that travel will go out. They'll maybe indulge in some alcohol. They will, maybe go to a casino. And so I know plenty of men and women who've been in those situations. I've had two brothers who've had to travel over the years, and it's hard when everybody else is going to the bar and they're going to let's go out and get some drinks, and I'm going to sit in my hotel room and have iced tea. Or you can feel isolated from the group, can't you, real quick? And so it's not just in terms of losing a spouse or a dear friend or someone like that, a family member. That can very much be a part of that, and grieving. We talked a little about grieving Sunday morning, you remember, in my class on Ruth with Naomi. And so this is it's important here. What I want to turn over to Genesis 2. I know it's got Genesis 3. I just kind of want to, I didn't put Genesis 2 up here first. I wanted you to notice something that I know you know this verse, but it really kind of stuck out for me. Really, I guess I just putting it together and thinking about it in this context. Of course, this is where God is, we're now chapter 2. We get kind of on the ground level view of Adam and Eve and the creation account. And of course, this is going to be where Adam is created first. And remember, there's no helper suitable for him. He's got all these animals, right? Isn't that enough? We say the dog is what? Man's best friend. Isn't that enough? So, remember, we have the naming of the animals, and I just always would imagine that, rhinoceros, or, how did that work exactly? But, and I think what God, this is my opinion, because I think the text is implying that, I think what God is doing is He's parading these here in front of Adam, and He's kind of asking him implied, the question, Adam, do you see any of these that you'd like to be intimate with? That you'd like to get close to? That you'd have like that real companionship? That you'd kind of like to share a home with? That you'd like to, I think he's trying to show, because the text says, what's it say as this was happening? Verse, so man gave the names to all the livestock, birds of the sky, and all the, but Look at the end of verse 20. What's it say? God does nothing without purpose, right? God's not just about naming these animals, is he? That's not what he's trying to get across, is he? He's showing Adam what? You need what? You need helper. What's another word? A companion. You need someone to share life with, and that's not dogs and cats. I know we can do it with them, but that's not intimacy. That's not companionship. That's not sharing and a closeness and a bond that is deeper than than the superficial, kind of the surface level. And again, I know animals can be great friends and pets, and that we're close to. But you start having a conversation with your dog back and forth, and hey, we may need to go and see somebody. If your dog and you start having deep conversations about life, I got some problems to worry about you if you think that's happening. Yeah, they start answering, especially rough, right? And so they can be great comfort, but the depth of companionship, it will not be found in animals, and that's what God is showing him. So of course he caused the Lord to cause man to what? Fall into deep sleep. Took him from the rib, and then notice what happens. Of course, down here, what? The man said, "Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman." But I even want you to go back and see back here in verse 18. This is kind of what I was going to start with before we jumped into the verse 18. God declared. Did you see that? He declared being alone was not good. It's not just a recognition of life where you're saying, well, that's just part of life. It's not good to be alone. God is declaring it. He is stating it, that it is not good for man to be alone. That's what I was trying to bookend. I knew I was forgetting the first part of the bookend. Verse 18 and verse 20 are your bookends. Verse 18, God declares it not good for man to be alone. Then God does what exercise with Adam? That's where I was missing. What did I just talk about? Hello? You with me tonight? Naming the animals. You're going to have to work with me here. I'm going to have to be a little punchy. I just talked about naming the animals. What was the purpose of that exercise? To show Adam that it's not good to be alone. Companionship. And so now we get this bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken from me. And so you have this design of God for companionship. Then you get into, and by the way, look at the end of verse 25 of chapter 2 here. Adam and his wife were both naked and felt what? They were completely known to each other. There was no hiding there with each other. They're not afraid. They're open. There's nothing to worry about. The two are one flesh. There's that closeness. And then chapter 3, it all falls apart, right? And Satan is going to get what? What do we talk about? Problems and suffering and pain all traces back to Satan. You know that. Satan gets what? Eve tempts her, and they partake of the fruit that they were commanded by the Lord not to. And you know what happened. Loneliness is what happened. The result of taking Satan's temptation, and continues to be an increase in loneliness. Sin, what does sin do? Sin hurts us. Sin isolates us. Sin causes pain. Separates us. They're going to have a separation with God, right? There's even going to be a aspect of their relationship as Adam and Eve that they didn't have before, remember? As a result of the fall. And so here's the thing about loneliness. it can be your own doing, your own choice. But often, here's where the real hard thing is, we're often the beneficiaries. We're the benefactors of somebody else's bad choices that results in our loneliness or pain or suffering. And so we can make bad choices, right, that can lead us to pain, separation, isolation, loneliness. But it's often the case also that it's not any doing of our own, but the choices of others have caused what? Us to have that pain and that separation and that loneliness. And that's the hard, even real hard aspect of this in our family, in our relationships. And so it's a sinful behavior it's not just tragic because it hurts us. It's also a tragedy because it affects other people, right? That's the biggest lie Satan could ever get us to think, that it's just your little, no one else, it won't hurt anybody else, what you're doing, what you're saying. Sin always, it doesn't just affect us, it affects other people. And this is going to have just a profound impact on the rest of humanity, obviously, Adam and Eve's own children. Now, let's go back to, by the way, this is my illustration. I know I had an illustration. All right. Satan's real good about making things, though, look like, right, it's not going to be a big deal. And I was thinking about all these different health cereals type of, that they, so you got, here's an example of Honey Bunches of Oats. Well, here's what's in the, here's what's in the ingredients. First thing is corn, then whole grain wheat, sugar. We haven't got to the oats yet, have we? Whole grain rolled oats. Okay, and then we get almonds and rice and so, but I find it interesting there that same with Honey Nut Cheerios. I was looking at the same thing, Honey Nut Cheerios. It'll advertise gluten-free. It'll lower your cholesterol, made from real honey. Okay, that all sounds good. First ingredient you get is the things like sugar, brown syrup, which is a sugar. Then you get down there and you get the wheat. You get the stuff that's that advertises good for you. The point is, you know this, they make a living off of advertising things one way, but it's not exactly as they present it. And that's what Satan does. He makes this look all healthy and perfect and wonderful. And maybe it's better than a chocolate donut, but it's presented and then it's another thing. And yes, go ahead.
You know what makes that label even worse?
What?
It's listed by largest percentage. So
Right.
whatever's listed first is the largest percentage
Right.
of the ingredient.
Yeah, that's right. It goes in order. That's right. So like I said, we get down here and we get down to the oats. After we get the corn and the grain and the sugar, then we get our oats that we were told about. And so, Satan does the same thing. It is a result of, really, loneliness is the ultimate fundamental result of sin. It leads to that which is harmful and separation. And so our Lord knew that. And He placed us in a created world. And let's go back to Genesis 2. So He creates two things that are going to counter loneliness, or that it's not good to be alone. He creates covenant marriage. So Brilena mentioned that. It's hard when we've lost a spouse, as our sweet Brilena has with our brother Robert. And you've been there. Some of you have been there. You've lost a spouse. And so, but God creates the covenant marriage to be the place where companionship and that togetherness is at its most intimate, highest level is in a marriage, a husband and wife. But notice the second thing He creates is a family, children. The blessedness of our descendants. Children, grandchildren, right? Family, nieces, nephews, grandparents, uncles, aunts. What is all that? That's a blessing, right, of not being alone. Of, I understand there's some, there's always some crazy ones in there and some difficult ones in there, but the point is God gives the blessing of our descendants that keep us from being isolated and alone. And in ancient times, your family, your tribe, right, was everything. That was so critical. We're studying the book of Ruth right now, and that law is going to come into effect. That Old Testament law that seems so just bizarre to us. The Levirate law, right, that if a man dies and he did not leave an heir, the next closest sibling or brother is to take and marry that wife and have children. And so we think about that and we go, well, that's just so odd. But they were a culture where everything was based on what? Your descendants, your lineage, your family. And not letting it what? Vanquish or what? Or die. Yeah. And it's actually a blessing when your quiver is what? When it's full. Children and their children's children are a blessing. Remember that? The Psalms talks about that. Proverbs talks about that. Why? Because we're not alone. We've got family. We've got a community there. That's the first community God builds. That's not the only community, is it? No, that's right. Church family, neighbors, friends. We can have other good, but what is the core, right, is that home, that unit. And that's what, incidentally, I think Satan, that's really all he's attacked. I know we see the effects of that in other parts of our society of Satan, but he has disrupted and destroyed more often than not. I think we're especially seeing that in our country. The foundation of all societies is what? The home, the family unit. And what's Satan want to do to it? Rip it apart. And then he can wreak havoc on our what? On our cities. Which is what's happening. Schools, communities, law enforcement. You just talk to people that, and so it traces back to so it's huge. Now, the church is to continue. Now, here's what I want you to think about. So, God immediately, He's not going to leave us in our isolation, is He? The plan was, before the foundation of the world, God knew this, that He would send His Son into the world. And we also see in Genesis 3, the first messianic, that one will come from the seed of woman who will crush the head of the serpent, and that's where you see the plan of salvation in motion. That God was doing that, bringing that about, and in this regard. And so Paul talks about, let's look at 2 Corinthians 5. I want you to see this in the gospel. I want you to see that the core message of the gospel addresses the idea of loneliness, of separation, of isolation. I don't know if I've quite seen it and thought about it in these terms, but, I missed that. Shame on me. 2 Corinthians 5, and somebody get that, 18 through 21, who'd like to read that. Okay, Kevin?
Now all these things are from God, who reconciled us to Himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. Namely, that God was in Christ, reconciling the world to Himself, not counting their wrongdoings against them. And He has committed to us the word of reconciliation. Therefore, we're ambassadors for Christ, as though God were making an appeal through us. We beg you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. You made Him who knew no sin to be sin in our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in Him.
Okay, so reconciliation is one of those big fancy words, religious words, but it means literally to make friends again. Two people who were once friends, who were once together, what has happened? You've been there, right? What happens sometimes? You fall apart. You do what? Grow apart. You grow apart. Maybe what else when you think about something comes between? right? You ever seen that?
One moves away, it's hard.
One moves away, yeah. But you ever seen something come between two people? You ever seen a family member, maybe a spouse? You can see a job. You ever seen a what? A difference of opinion. Yeah, you can get into all sorts of things that can cause eventual hostility or alienation or separation. I'm no longer close to this person. And there's actually even some animosity that exists. Once we were friends, and you can see examples of people who were once friends, and now they become kind of enemies. You ever had that? You ever seen that? It happens. There's family. Believe me, I've done a bunch of funerals. And there are times I've done funerals where they make it very clear to me, she's sitting over here, I'm sitting over there. We're not talking. I don't talk to her. I don't talk to him. We're not. I'm talking about mother with father with sons and daughters. I mean, it is, and so the gospel, Kevin read for us, is Jesus came to reconcile, first of all, us, to bring us back to who? To God. Now, who caused the separation there? We did. Yeah, Satan, and God didn't. Yeah, God didn't. But now He's pursuing and has been pursuing since the fall, even before the foundation of the world. We know the plan was to reconcile, to bring us back to God. And then what was Kevin reading? He's given us the what? Ministry of what? As if though God is what? What's it say? Pleading what? Entreating through us. What's another way of saying that? God wants people to be reconciled to Him, and we are the what? The ambassador. What's other words? What's other words you would use to describe that? The instrument, the what? The go-between, the vehicle, the bridge. If there's going to be a reconciliation between the world with God and the world, man with God, mankind with God, we are what? We play a part of that, right? And I think that's a big part of the gospel message, is this ministry of reconciliation. And I find it interesting that, we have two practices specifically in the church that are all about this reconciliation. You've got baptism, which, brings us to God in that full saving moment of salvation in penitent faith. But it also places us in a church, the body of Christ, and then you have the Lord's Supper. And the Lord's Supper is not all about you. I mean, we've preached that, we talk about that constantly, but I'm telling you, the Lord's Supper at its core is also about each other. What was going on? I mean, what was the whole context of Paul teaching in 1 Corinthians about the Lord's Supper? What was the church, how were they getting along? They were fighting. There was division. And the Lord's Supper should have been a symbolic pointing to we are one body in Christ. Christ has saved us, but He's placed us in a family. And so the baptism, the Lord's Supper, all point us to that. And so the Lord gives the church as an instrument to fix, through the gospel, to fix the loneliness. How are we described as Christians? Brothers and what? Sisters. Right? We can be a family to people who don't have much or maybe any what? Family. You can be a grandparent to a child that they don't have much mom and dad life. I'm going to be doing a funeral, part of a funeral Saturday. A dear Christian lady passed away at Crosstown. Maggie, we were talking about her, and she had a big impact even on my daughter Megan. And Sandy she was a teacher, and she poured herself into other kids. And she taught Wednesday nights for forever at Crosstown. She was tutoring. That's when she started tutoring Megan a little bit with chemistry, because Sandy taught chemistry. And when Megan was kind of thinking about being a doctor and going into that field several years ago, and Sandy helped her with chemistry, and and that's how Sandy did that. She herself and her husband did not have children, and so she poured herself into countless children. They had a bus ministry. Remember bus ministries in the church? We used to have those. Ron, even some of y'all remember those in churches? They'd go in those neighborhoods, and they'd round up kids. And then they'd bring them in the church building, and the members would panic and go, ah, there's 40 kids running around screaming. You ever heard about that in some churches? It happened at Crosstown. We got to do something with all these kids. They're going crazy. They're talking and saying things. And Sandy was one of those members that took those children and she mentored them. She molded them. She poured into them. We're all to be a part of the ministry of reconciliation. That's what the church is to be about. In however way we can do that. And maybe we're not all teachers. I understand that. But that's what we have. And so I think that's an important part here. Okay. Loneliness is also an opportunity. Let's look at Psalm 25 here real quick. So Psalm 25, it's an interesting psalm. It's interesting for several reasons. One, it's only one of 5 psalms that's an acrostic. It takes, there's 5 of these in the book of Psalms. They take the first letter, every line, every verse, each line begins with the letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So there's 22 letters, and it goes through the Hebrew alphabet. It's very unique stylistically and the way the poetry, the way the Hebrew poetry is. So it's a very unique psalm for a lot of reasons. But I think it also speaks of this subject as well here, what David was facing. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. Verse 1. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. No one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame, but shame will come on those who are treacherous without cause. Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are my God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. Remember, Lord, your great mercy and love, for they are from of old. Do not remember the sins of my youth and my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me, for you, Lord, are good. And he goes on to talk about then in the next section about being taught, being instructed, and being forgiven in the ways of God. I think it's a great psalm that expresses this. David would often feel isolated. We have several examples of that in the Bible. What would be some examples that come to mind? Okay, yeah. He spent a number of years, what? Hiding. And where would he actually hide out in? Boy, now that's a real warm, bright, not enclosed, right? Non-claustrophobic, right? Yeah, right. In a cave, what? Where it's what? Cold, dark, damp, lonely, right? And so he would often be found in those situations, and he's describing that here in this example here in Psalm 25, and he'll talk about a couple of things here. He'll talk about the need for forgiveness. I mean, what did we just say? Fundamentally, all sin, all loneliness and isolation, you can trace it back to sin, to the fall. And so David is one that he appeals to God, that God would forgive him, that God would restore him, and I think that's a fundamental need that every person has, no matter what they're going through or facing, that they need the Lord's help, and that's what David appeals here. He also talks about several times, teach me your ways. He'll say that there in verses 4 and 12 and 15 over and over again. Teach me your ways. And then, so we're running out of time, he also talks about, and this is where we come into, I think, an application of this loneliness. I will wait for you. That waiting is hard, especially when we're lonely, when we're isolated, when we're frustrated. Matter of fact, we have an example of David in the cave when Saul is looking for him. And remember what happens? Saul, what? Falls asleep. And David has an opportunity, actually twice, to do what? All of his men are like, what? This is your chance. And he says what? I will not strike the Lord's anointed. God wants me to be king. I'm going to be what? I'll be king when what? When the time is right. I mean, and yet here he is living for years on the run in isolation. And yet, several times here, that I will trust in you, that I will wait patiently for you. And I've seen that. I've seen that with people who've had to, whether it's jobs or, looking for a companion or a spouse or maybe to have a child. I mean, I've seen that where they've had to wait patiently and trust the Lord. And that's hard. That's real, real hard. And so I think, there's a couple of promises he also mentions too. This, you will not be ashamed. That's a promise of God. God will be true. And you don't have to worry and fear. God will do what He says He will do. And you'll be rescued. And so there's always the promise of God that no matter what it looks like, how dark, how dreary, how isolated we feel, God will come to our rescue. God will provide what we need to make it through. Let me ask you, as we close, who are some Bible characters? Notice how I've got this worded. That is an example of the lonely result of sin. I mean, it's the result of sin and the Lord's salvation. Who are some examples that come to mind that you can think of? Moses. Okay. Yeah. Samson. Who's some others you think about? Result of the example of a lonely result of sin. David himself. Yeah. Noah in the ark, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not his sin, right? That is, even though he wasn't sinless, it was the world. Who else? Someone? Paul. Yeah. Peter. That was kind of mine. There's a big one. Do what? Rahab. There's Judas, yeah. There's a real big one. Jesus. Someone says, wait a minute. Result of sin, not his sin. But what's he feeling in the Garden of Gethsemane? The loneliness, the isolation is just crushing on him. And he cries out to God. And yet God, what? The Lord's salvation is what? Is there. The Lord comes to him. And so I think that's such a key in life when we find ourselves in those moments and those seasons. They're going to happen. They're natural emotions and feelings and struggles. It'll often be because of our own choice, but often not. It'll be the choice of others. And we just have to continue to trust the Lord in His deliverance and in His salvation. And I think that Satan will do everything he can to get us to think we're not any good, that there's something wrong with us, that it's our fault. I mean, he will get us to doubt and question everything he can do. You've been there. Some of you have been there. You've been lonely. You've been isolated. And Satan can use that to try to crush us and defeat us. And he'll often try to get people away from the church as a result of that and isolate them from God's people. And in so many ways, but God provides the answer for this and in the gospel. And so this is one of Satan's big arrows that he comes at us with. And at the core of the gospel is about destroying that and bringing us to God, a reconciliation, and with each other into a family. And so, all right. Well, we appreciate you being here tonight. And yes, Lucy?
Things He hath done, so loved He the world that He gave us His Son, who yielded his life an atonement for sin, and opened the life gate that all may go